What's up, guys? Welcome back to the next installment of the Fish and Drift / onsong performance R33.4. So it's literally the day after Matsuri. It's Monday after Matsuri now, so we've got to order a few things. It's going to be a little while before we actually get into this thing, but I just wanted to sort of make this clip while everything's still fresh in the head while we're here. So basically, after we left on Saturday, car was all right. Brad kept driving into the sort of the night. By the time it got dark, he decided not to drive anymore. He didn't want to risk putting this thing into a tyre barrier in the dark. That track, particularly the 3 to 6, is very, very hard to see in the dark. I've done it a million times, driving in the dark 3 to 6 off the side of the, basically straight off after turn 3 in the transition between 3 to 6, going straight off the track right where there was a tyre bundle. It's really hard to judge. There's not many lights on the infield. It's not very nice. So lots of shadows. Yeah, it's very shadowy. It's really, really hard to pick. It does throw your judgment off quite a bit. So Brad decided not to drive into the night for risk of putting the car into a tyre barrier, which I don't blame him for all the carnage that was there. And then on Sunday, he sort of just wasn't really feeling it either, and just decided that they were just going to quit while they were ahead, pretty much. One thing I did forget to get on camera, we did come in at one point. We were looking for like boost leaks and stuff in the charge piping, and because the bonnet latch is a bit funny and there's no bonnet stick on the car, basically I left the bonnet down but didn't latch it. I had planned to come back to it. We went out on track and the bonnet flew up, so that was a bit of a shame. Windscreen copped it. And I just got glass in my finger. Nice. And the roof got a little bit of a dent from the D-Max vents. But surprisingly enough, the bonnet's actually not too bad. I really thought that a carbon fibre bonnet hitting that part of the roof would basically just crease it and fold it and break it. But a bit of damage to the vent, but overall not as bad as it could have been. So that sucked. But anyway, while it's all fresh in the head, problems we had with the car, obviously, as I said in the video, tune was just not even close enough. That was just basically a consequence of lack of time. Trying to learn a whole new platform on someone else's dyno in such a short amount of time, the tune, it just wasn't close enough. So massive thanks to Nick from NA Autosports for getting us that LTC. Without it, we would have been screwed. And I did spend most of the day on Saturday just tuning this thing. Honestly, where it is now is pretty close. However, it doesn't really matter much because the whole setup's now going to change anyway. So now it is time to get our Pulsar Turbo Systems GDX 3076 Gen 2 on this thing. As you guys saw in the video, we did have a fire, an oil fire, first run, which basically was a consequence of RBs are pretty well known for pushing oil out the breathers. It's not so much a blow-by thing, it's just the amount of oil you end up in the head, and without proper splash guards on the cams, it just pushes it out in the breathers. So Boost Dock actually make a splash guard that go over the cams, which try and stop this so that your covers can still breathe, but they're not going to throw oil everywhere up into the breathers. And that's what Brad actually already has. He just hasn't put on the car yet because he has the covers siliconed on and he didn't want to unsilicon them to put them on. So between sort of overfilling the car, having that issue, it was just pushing too much oil out of this into this catch can, which out of this breather was just pushing oil out. And as you can see, oil comes out. All of the exhaust manifold and oil return and everything's wrapped in that exhaust wrap, which I personally hate with a passion. And basically the oil just soaked the exhaust wrap, and this got that hot that it caught fire. And that's a problem. So when the turbo goes on, manifold's coming off, we've got an exhaust leak we're going to try and find. Going to take all of that wrap off. Deleting all of it. I'm getting rid of all of that wrap. I hate it. Also going to obviously install those splash guards on the cams that Brad has to try and fix that issue. But we're also going to change this catch can setup all up as well. So I'm also going to make all new charge piping for the car and a new intake, as well as a new dump, obviously, to suit the new turbo, as well as all new oil feed lines, return lines, and water lines. So the charge piping, we're going to make one piece each side. At the moment, there's a few pieces each side, which adds extra joins, which are not needed. They're just more points of failure. We can weld alley so we can make them one piece. So one piece this side, a joint at the throttle body, a joint at the intercooler, no blow-off valve, hardly anything to go wrong. One piece this side, going to change the routing a little bit. On the new turbo, on the Pulsar Turbo, we will weld a cast elbow off the housing because that is also a really good idea for alleviating a lot of issues you do have with cars like this. Having a silicon elbow off the housing like that when it's so close to the manifold, you almost always get splits. So we'll put a cast elbow on it, which gets that away from heat, and then from that cast elbow, again, one piece on this side, one joint at each end, hardly anything to go wrong. We're going to reroute this charge pipe so that I can remake the intake and actually put Brad's filter down through this hole where there's this nice big gaping hole in the bar. We can have a nice, good cold air intake down there. So we'll have 4-inch out of the turbo inlet, and that'll come pretty much across, and that'll all be one piece as well, with just the filter on the end and some bracing probably to this rad support to keep it up nice and tight and stop it bouncing and stuff like that. So nice cold air intake. With this new intake pipe, what I'm going to do is get rid of this filter. It actually screws onto a fitting on this catch can. From there, I'm going to run another AN10 or 12, don't know which one yet, but it depends, into an oil air separator. And then from the oil air separator, I'm going to run that back to the intake pipe. And essentially it's going to breathe back through the intake, which actually is going to suck or draw a lot of that pressure out of the crankcase a little bit, and then through the oil air separator. If it does still manage to try and throw heaps of oil out with those splash guards on the cams, the oil air separator will sort that out before it goes back into the intake, and it should be happy days. So that's how I plan to sort out the oiling situation, so that it doesn't blow oil everywhere, which causes issues. Not only that, but wastegate Mac valve. We're going to remake all of these lines on the Mac valve that go obviously from the charge pipe to the Mac valve, and then from the Mac valve to the wastegate over here. We've got to remake all those out of braid. So that's all going to be braided stainless and fittings, so that there's no rubber hose. That way you don't get splits and boost leaks, which obviously then cause other problems. So just another thing to make it more reliable, get rid of some issues, work around some issues, the aim is just to get this thing as reliable as possible. Everything I want to do to this car, I want to make sure I do it and improve the car's reliability, because one of the big things with the boys living in Yeppoon and wanting to go travel around, do all this stuff they want to do this year, the car needs to be reliable. There's no point in them driving from Yeppoon 3 days to frickin' South Australia to go to bloody Mount Gambier and get there and the car has problems. I actually just noticed that this bonnet did cop it under here. That's a bloody shame. That really sucks. It's only that side's the worst one. So yeah, she did cop a bit of a beating there, but hopefully they can fix that up. Anyway, back to the point. Obviously then with the new turbo, we'll remake the dump pipe as well. Try and remake the dump pipe in a way that it sort of brings it away from the block, so there's plenty of room for the oil feed and water feed lines over there. And we'll move his oxygen, his wideband further downstream. I do want to try and get the thermocouple here, the EGT probe. When we have all this apart, I want to try and put that in the collector in the manifold, see if there's a way that I can wire that into the MoTeC. I am also going to put a port on the collector or the housing, not sure yet, and try and get an EMAP sensor in this car to wire into the MoTeC as well. Not only that, but when I do this charge pipe on this side, I would like to put an IAT sensor pre-intercooler, as well as having the post-intercooler one. So a few extra sensors there that I'd like to wire in if we have the extra inputs. I'm not sure where we're up to with the M130 as to how many spares we've got, but there's a few extra sensors like that that I'd like to run in this thing, just for the sake of there's a few cool things that I can do with the MoTeC with those extra sensors input to again keep this thing reliable, keep it always running perfect, basically keep it always as efficient as possible. The other thing obviously we had with Matsuri, which I explained in the video, is because of the stupid tyre barriers, the cars always getting written off and having to wait for tilt trays to take cars off track and stuff like that. We ended up sitting in line for ages. Matsuri, it's always memed about pretty much the fact that how much you have to sit around at Matsuri, but this one was particularly insane. It was crazy how much we had to stand around and sit. Now, this thing sitting in line was getting hot. It was just creeping up in temperature. It does have an underdrive pulley, like a balancer, and it's still running the mechanical fan. So obviously the underdrive pulley is slowing, that's all slowed down, which means at idle it's probably not moving as much water and as much air as it normally would be, which would be not ideal. But the other thing is obviously because we didn't have an ISE set up, in order to get this thing to idle and start cold, I had to crack the throttle a fair bit. Like the throttle stop is fairly open to allow quite a bit of air into that manifold so that this thing will run and start when it's cold. The issue with that is the only way to bring the idle back down when it's hot is to pull heaps of timing out of it. So this thing at idle is only running like literally pretty much 0 degrees of timing. And that really retarded timing at idle is definitely would not have been helping with the temperature. So that would have been definitely compounding the issue of this thing sitting at idle and getting warm. So we decided we are just going to buy an IACV for this thing. When I built the loom, I put the 4 wires in for an IACV, so they are there, they're ready to go. So we're going to chuck one in this thing. That way at idle, not only will it start better and more reliably, it'll idle at a reasonable timing, it won't get hot. There's so much more we can do, and it's going to be a lot better car. So I think that covers pretty much everything that we are planning on doing from this point out. If we've got enough inputs, I'd also like to put a turbine speed sensor in the turbo. There is a port for it in the Pulsar, so if we can get one of them in there as well. You know, we're looking at running a small turbo on this car because it's a drift car. We want to have that really nice, big power curve with lots of area under the curve. So because of that, and also obviously the other great thing about being at Matsuri was really seeing how Brad drives and how he wants the car to behave and where he needs the power. That's exactly how he drives, that's what he needs. So my prediction is that this car is always going to be one of those cars where we're always going to be going for the smallest turbo that we possibly can to make the power we want, so that it is basically as much area under the power curve as we possibly can. So when you do want to run these smaller turbos to their limits, you know, you want to maximize their efficiency, basically run them all the way out to the edge of their efficiency islands. Having things like EMAP and turbine speed and things like that really allow you to push these things right to their limits, and basically give you somewhere reliable to stop pushing these things so that you're not pushing them too far. So if we've got enough inputs, I'll get all those in the car. The other thing is, you would have heard with the idle, I really chopped up the idle in this thing. Sounds awesome. I really like it. Brad really likes it. And I've set it with the TPS threshold. I ended up getting it all the way down to 0.5% TPS is when it's meant to come out of that idle map and basically smooth out and allow him to drive. But it was still very pig rooty and annoying for him to try and get through the pits. So to try and fix that, what I would like to do, this thing has never had any sort of speedo. I believe it's because I think it might have originally been a DE car. And it's obviously got an RB25 gearbox in it now, so they've changed the speed signal, or the speed sensor has changed. So I'm assuming that's why this thing's probably never had a speed input, but there's no reason I can't wire it straight to the MoTeC. So I would like to try, when we do the hot side, to wire the speed signal from the gearbox straight to the MoTeC, so that I can hopefully put in a condition in that idle setting so that as soon as the car is rolling, as soon as there's some wheel speed, that it pulls it out of that idle map. So that'll help a lot with just the slow drivability and leaving the idle the way it was, because we do really like how it sounded at idle. And that is pretty much the complete of what we're doing with the car. So the other thing is the intercooler on it's just like an eBay setup. IATs aren't too bad, but once again, if we want to try and make sort of 500 horsepower with only a 76 mil compressor, we are pushing it a little bit, particularly if we want to start making more than 500. But I don't know. We'll talk to Brad about that. But regardless, having the pre and post IATs is going to allow us probably a really good avenue to maybe try and get a sponsor on board for a cooler or something like that. We'll have a really good avenue for testing. But anyway, that's a future thing. So the other thing is, obviously with these Sonic 1000cc injectors, I didn't have any reliable injector data. I went through all this in that video where I set it all up, and they're obviously a problem. If you look at the shape of the fuel map, you can see that these are just not right. So I'm going to try and get onto Sonic, just try and get injector data from Sonic to see if I can manually populate the data in the MoTeC and get this thing right with these injectors. But if I can't, well then we're also going to change injectors in this thing to get ones that definitely have correct data in the MoTeC library in the software, so that we can basically have this thing running properly with proper injector data. So I think that's covered all bases. That's basically just a post-Matsuri analysis of what we're going to do to this car now to get it to the next stage with this Pulsar turbo, and yeah, really get it happening. So when I pull this hot side apart, want to give this all a really good wash. You can see those powder fire extinguishers, they're really, really bad for things. They etch metal, they etch things. I tried my best when we came into the pits after we had the fire out to wash as much of it as I could. Particularly, I was focusing on the compressor housing for the turbo and trying to get it off the head because it's really, really bad for alloys. So when all that's apart, I'll plug all the exhaust ports and really give this thing a really good wash. But anyway, so that's it. Hope you are going to enjoy watching it. I think at this point this clip is quite long, so yep. This video can be its own video, just a post Matsuri analysis of what's going on with the car, but definitely gets driven in that mid-range most of the time, so that's where we're focusing. And yeah, looking forward to getting this car sorted for the next one, and thanks for watching, as always. Peace out, see you, bye.